In the tight-knit, picturesque community of Media, Pennsylvania, the mid-1970s often conjured images of idyllic, carefree, suburban life. It was a place where doors were often left unlocked, and children, after school and on weekends, roamed freely, riding bikes until dusk without a second thought. For the Eaton family, their home on Moccasin Trail had been a sanctuary for 2 decades, a place of quiet stability where Roland and Joan Eaton had raised 3 children and built a life that seemed utterly secure. But on one particular Saturday in May, that picture of perfect tranquility would be irrevocably shattered, replaced by an agonizing mystery that has endured for nearly 5 decades. This is the story of Wendy Eaton, a young girl who simply vanished into thin air. On May 17, 1975, Roland and Joan Eaton woke up to an unremarkable Saturday morning. The sun shone brightly, promising a perfect day in the mid-70s, inviting optimism. Their 2 oldest children, Richard, 19, and Nancy, 21, were away at college, carving out paths of their own. But their youngest, almost 16-year-old Wendy, was still very much the beloved child of the home. Petite and delicate, at just 4 feet 10 inches and weighing a mere 90 pounds, Wendy was often mistaken for someone much younger. Her parents doted on her as the baby of the family, the last piece of their child-rearing journey. That particular morning held a small celebration. Wendy had just earned her learner's permit. It was a quiet milestone, celebrated as modestly as she did everything. Her subdued pride was masked by her naturally soft-spoken nature. Roland and Joan were thrilled, acknowledging their youngest was taking steps toward the independence they knew was inevitable. Yet, in Wendy's case, adulthood still seemed so far away. She was idealistic, a girl who immersed herself in wholesome church activities, played guitar and piano beautifully, and clung to her favorite television shows. She was sweet, responsible, and utterly devoted to her family. Around mid-morning, Roland and Joan decided to take advantage of the beautiful weather and plan a round of golf at a nearby country club. Before they left, they found Wendy sunbathing on the flat roof outside her bedroom window, a favorite perch during peaceful weekends. The sunlight made her brown hair glow, and her small frame appeared even more fragile stretched out against the shingles. Joan poked her head outside the window. "Wendy, we're heading to the club. Do you want to come with us?" she asked cheerfully. Wendy shook her head without opening her eyes, her voice light as she replied, "No thanks, I think I'll go to the mall later to pick up a present for Richard's birthday." It was a simple, innocent exchange, one that would replay in their minds with agonizing precision for the rest of their lives. Roland and Joan drove off, utterly content, believing their youngest child was safe at home, enjoying a carefree afternoon. As far as they could tell, it was a normal, forgettable day. The Eaton family's quiet day unraveled just after 5:30 p.m. when Roland and Joan returned home. The house was still empty, which wasn't unusual, but something felt wrong. When he should have been back by then, possibly getting ready for the church choir rehearsal, where she was scheduled to perform that evening. Music was her passion. She never missed a concert, practicing tirelessly to perfect each performance. Joan tried to reassure herself. Maybe she went straight to the church, she told Roland. But it wasn't like Wendy to skip out on plans without a note. She was a creature of habit, preferring routine over spontaneity. They checked her room. Her bed was unmade, a habit her parents had long given up correcting. Her bathing suit lay crumbled on the floor, evidence of her earlier sunbathing. A John Denver record sat out, its sleeve on a shelf, and a stack of church sheet music was neatly organized near her piano. But then, details emerged that raised concern. Her purse was still there, odd for a shopping trip. Her learner's permit, her meager spending money, all untouched. Joan picked up the permit, the symbol of Wendy's nascent independence, and the worry began to slowly sink in. Roland, trying to quell the rising panic, drove to the church. He hoped to see her, guitar in hand. Instead, he was met with confusion. Her friends were gathering, but none had seen Wendy all day. "Are you sure she didn't just decide to stay home?" one girl asked. Roland forced a tight smile, muttering, She's probably on her way. He left quickly, his heart pounding against his ribs, driving back home. By 7 p.m., there was no longer any question. Something was terribly wrong. Joan was frantic, calling Wendy's friends one by one, each call bringing the same devastating answer. No one had seen Wendy. "You don't think she ran away, do you?" Joan asked a friend, clutching the receiver. The friend hesitated, then replied, "Wendy? No, that's not like her at all." They both knew Wendy wasn't the type to disappear. She was grounded, loyal, and incredibly close to her family. Running away simply didn't make sense. Finally, after exhausting every possible avenue, Roland made the call to the police. "Our daughter is missing." The small police department's initial response was cautious, accustomed to teenagers who often reappeared. But as Joan and Roland described Wendy's character, her faith, her lack of interest in dating, her strict adherence to routines, it became clear that this case didn't fit the mold of a typical runaway. As darkness fell, neighbors gathered in hushed clusters outside the Eaton home. The quiet cul-de-sac, usually so serene, buzzed with tension. Police officers knocked on doors, asking if anyone had seen Wendy. A handful of witnesses came forward. "I saw her walking toward the mall," one neighbor said. "It must have been a little after 3. Another man, who had driven down Indian Lane, noted something chilling. "I passed her on the road at 3:10. I had to run an errand, and when I came back the same way, just 7 minutes later, she was gone." In a span of 7 minutes, Wendy Eaton had vanished in a thin air. The police search for Wendy began in earnest the following morning. Officers from the Pennsylvania State Police joined local law enforcement, canvassing the area where Wendy had last been seen, the intersection of Indian Lane and Media Station Road. It was a quiet, tree-lined area, surrounded by suburban homes and patches of woods. To the untrained eye, nothing seemed amiss. But to investigators, the lack of any physical evidence was troubling. Tracking dogs were brought in, starting in Wendy's bedroom where her scent was strongest. The dogs meticulously led their handlers down the road, retracing Wendy's likely path toward the mall. But when they reached the corner of Indian Lane and Media Station Road, the dogs hesitated. After a moment, they sat down, signaling that Wendy's trail ended abruptly. It was as if she had simply disappeared from that spot. The logical, chilling conclusion: Wendy had likely been picked up by someone in a vehicle. The sudden loss of her scent was consistent with a car stopping and Wendy getting inside, either willingly or by force. Detectives considered both scenarios. If Wendy had been picked up by someone she knew, it would explain the lack of struggle. But who? Friends, neighbors, church acquaintances, all were questioned. The possibility of abduction loomed darkly. Neighbors had seen Wendy, but none had seen her get into a vehicle. If she had accepted a ride from someone familiar, it might have looked entirely normal, even innocuous, to a casual observer. The days immediately following Wendy's disappearance brought a flurry of activity, but no answers. The investigation felt like chasing a phantom. The absence of struggle or any dropped possession confounded investigators. In most missing person cases, there's something to work with. If she had been kidnapped, the abductor had acted swiftly and silently, leaving no trace. And yet, there were no indications that Wendy had left voluntarily either. Her purse, money, and that new learner's permit remained in her room. And crucially, her Bibles were still there. A deeply religious girl, Wendy would have undoubtedly taken at least one of them if she had planned to leave. Tips poured in from across the state, some hopeful, others heartbreaking, a few absurd. Then, a week after Wendy disappeared, a peculiar lead emerged. A Chicago-based runaway hotline reported receiving a call from a girl who claimed she was a 15-year-old from Media, Pennsylvania, running away. She gave no further details before hanging up. Police couldn't confirm if the call was genuine or a cruel hoax, but the timing was eerie. It was the only lead that even remotely suggested Wendy might still be alive, and the Eatons clung to it, desperate for any scrap of hope. The most disturbing development came from a different direction entirely. A man named William C. Richardson and a 17-year-old boy were arrested for extortion after demanding a $10,000 ransom from Wendy's parents in exchange for information about her whereabouts. The The boy was arrested when he went to collect the first installment, implicating Richardson. But it was a cruel hoax. Neither knew where Wendy was. They had simply preyed on the Eatons' unimaginable grief and desperation. As weeks turned into months, theories about what happened to Wendy swirled through the community. The theory that gained the most traction, however, was far more unsettling. Rumors began circulating that Wendy had been recruited by a religious cult. In the mid-1970s, groups like the Children of God and the Unification Church were attracting teenagers with promises of spiritual fulfillment. Wendy's strong faith and gentle, trusting nature made her a prime target for manipulation. Police investigated a group known as the Forever Family, a fundamentalist Christian organization with aggressive recruitment tactics. Several sightings of a girl matching Wendy's description with Forever family members were reported across the state, from King of Prussia to Scranton. Investigators followed up on every lead, but each time, their hopes were dashed. The girls turned out to be other runaways or remained unidentified. Wendy's parents were skeptical, but felt compelled to explore every avenue. Roland even attended Forever family meetings in disguise, scanning every face, desperately hoping for a glimpse of his daughter. Joan wrote letters to other cults across the country, begging for information. Every effort led only to disappointment. By the end of 1975, the investigation had stalled. Police had exhausted every lead, and the Eatons were left to grapple with the unbearable silence. The holidays were particularly cruel. Joan couldn't bring herself to decorate the house. Roland spent Christmas Eve driving through nearby towns, stopping at shelters and bus stations, handing out flyers, a futile but desperate act. Over the years, other theories emerged. Some believed Wendy had fallen victim to a serial killer operating in the area. At least 6 other young women had gone missing in Delaware counties around the same time, 5 of whose bodies were later found in a wooded area near Tinicum. While police initially considered a connection, they later ruled it out, as the other victims were linked to a local motorcycle gang known as the Warlocks, a world Wendy had no ties to. The lack of answers weighed heavily on the Eatons. Roland became consumed by the search, spending countless weekends hiking through wooded areas, always searching. Joan withdrew from the world, unable to reconcile her faith with the agony of losing her daughter. In 1983, after 8 agonizing years of fruitless searching, the Eatons made the heartbreaking decision to have Wendy declared legally dead. The ruling brought no closure, only a grim acknowledgement of reality. Roland and Joan lived out the rest of their lives haunted by unanswered questions, never stopping their quiet search. Joan passed away in 1995, followed by Roland in 2007. Neither of them ever stopped believing that Wendy was out there, somewhere. Today, the case remains open. Detectives still periodically review the file, holding on to the hope that new evidence or advances in technology, like DNA testing or facial recognition software, might finally emerge. Until then, Wendy Eaton's disappearance remains one of Pennsylvania's most enduring mysteries. Wendy Eaton has been missing since May 17, 1975. If you have any information, please contact the Media Police Department at 610-565-0210 or the Pennsylvania State Police.
Hey, this is Tony from the Cold Case Project, where we focus on unsolved cases across the United States. Our mission is to bring attention to these unresolved mysteries that need your help. All the information we cover in these cases is readily available on the internet, but we rewrite and repurpose it for the purpose of these videos. Our goal is to spread the word about the thousands of unsolved cold cases still out there. Thank you for watching. If you want to help shed light on these cases, make sure to like and subscribe for more content. Your support can make a difference.
In the tight-knit communities of Springdale and Cheswick, Pennsylvania, the year 1981 carried a veneer of quiet normalcy. For young people, weekends often meant the local skating rink. But on one particular Friday in May, that ordinary scene would become the backdrop for an extraordinary mystery, leaving behind a family in anguish and a disappearance that still echoes through the decades. This is the enduring story of Kathleen Kelly. Kathleen Kelly was just a teenager, a bright and vibrant 15-year-old, when she was last seen on May 22, 1981. That day, like many Fridays, she headed to the Cheese Arena skating rink in Cheswick, Pennsylvania. She wasn't alone. She was with her brother-in-law and several nieces and nephews, who, despite the familial titles, were close to Kathleen's age, making them more like friends. The rink itself was familiar territory, as both Kathleen's brother-in-law and her sister, Judy Stanko, who was over 20 years older than Kathleen, worked there. At some point during the day, Kathleen grew restless. Teenagers get bored. So, she decided to leave the rink and walk the 8 blocks to her sister Judy's house. Judy was home alone with her infant daughter. For about an hour, the sisters chatted, a seemingly ordinary afternoon visit. Then, Kathleen announced she was leaving again, planning to walk the final 6 blocks to her own home in Springdale. Judy, with the intuition of an older sister, felt a subtle unease. She asked Kathleen if she was sure she wanted to walk alone. Kathleen, however, simply replied she would be fine, and then she was gone. Judy was left with a lingering feeling that Kathleen was being evasive, that perhaps she had secret plans for the evening. It was a premonition that would soon turn into a chilling reality. Kathleen Kelly never arrived home that day. She was never heard from again. In the immediate aftermath, the family was plunged into a desperate search. But from the outset, the case was heavily influenced by a specific theory. Kathleen's niece, Kimberly Robertson, who was close to Kathleen, believed her aunt was not abducted. Kimberly felt there were unspecified problems at Kathleen's home at the time, leading her to believe Kathleen had run away to escape them, with no intention of returning. This belief, tragically, resonated with law enforcement. The police, from the very beginning, treated Kathleen's disappearance as a runaway case. In the early 1980s, resources for such cases were often limited compared to suspected abductions. There were no obvious signs of a struggle, no forced entry, no immediate evidence of foul play. As a result, Kathleen's case was not seriously investigated in those crucial early hours and days. The precious window for gathering fresh leads, for potentially finding a different outcome, slowly closed with each passing hour the case remained labeled as a voluntary departure. Years crawled by. The initial hopes faded, replaced by the heavy silence of an unsolved mystery. Then, nearly a decade after Kathleen vanished, a series of perplexing phone calls offered a tantalizing, yet frustrating, glimpse of what might have happened. Around 1991, Kimberly Robertson began receiving strange calls at her Springdale home. The first was chillingly direct. "You know who I am, and I'm fine," a voice stated simply, before the line immediately went dead. Was it Kathleen? After so many years, the possibility was both electrifying and terrifying. The calls continued, but became even more cryptic. Kimberly would pick up the phone, only to be met with silence on the other end. She would speak, pleading, "Is that you, Kathleen?" Each time, the only response was the click of the caller hanging up. These silent calls, broken only by Kimberly's desperate questions, spoke volumes. A yearning for connection, perhaps a subtle message, or even a desperate plea from someone who couldn't speak freely. Kimberly also held another significant belief that complicated the timeline of the disappearance itself. She stated that she believed Kathleen actually vanished in 1980, not 1981, as is officially listed. This discrepancy, while seemingly minor, adds another layer of uncertainty to a case already shrouded in ambiguity. Despite the passage of over 40 years, the mystery of Kathleen Kelly endures. Was she a runaway, escaping difficulties as her niece believed? Did she intentionally sever ties, only to offer those fleeting, enigmatic phone calls years later? Or did something far more sinister befall her after she left her sister's home? The lack of an immediate, comprehensive investigation in 1981 has left her family with decades of unanswered questions. The calls to Kimberly Robertson remain a haunting mystery, neither confirming Kathleen's safety nor fully explaining her absence. Kathleen Kelly's case remains unsolved, categorized as a missing person. On a seemingly ordinary Monday in the spring of 1987, a man left his job, drove away in his car, and simply vanished. This isn't just a missing persons case. It's a chilling tale of family feuds, suspected crime, and a brother's unsettling past. This is the enduring mystery of William Mueller. It was March 23, 1987. William Mueller, a plumber, finished his shift at SmithKline Beecham, located at 15th and Spring Garden in Philadelphia. At around 2:30 p.m., he got into his black 1983 Plymouth Turismo and drove off. His normal route would have taken him to his home on Beaver Run Road in Nockamixon Township, Pennsylvania. But William Mueller never arrived. He was never seen or heard from again. When friends, unable to reach him, went to check on William at his home, they found a scene that suggested a hasty departure, or perhaps an interrupted one. His guns, normally secured, were still in their cabinet. A pot of spaghetti sat on the stove. Nothing seemed to be missing from the house, except for William's car, which has also never been recovered. It was as if he'd been pulled away from his life mid-sentence. What makes William's disappearance particularly unsettling is the context surrounding it. Just 2 weeks before he vanished, William had taken his younger brother, Frederick William Mueller, to court. Their mother had passed away, and William was suing Frederick for control over her estate. This included the very farmhouse and 17-acre property on Ferry Road where the brothers had grown up. But it wasn't just about inheritance. William believed Frederick was running a serious narcotics operation out of that family home, and he was determined to put a stop to it. After William's sudden disappearance, the lawsuit against Frederick was abruptly dropped. The shadow of William's disappearance lingered for years, a dark cloud over the Mueller family. Then, in 2000, 13 years after William vanished, Frederick Mueller was finally arrested on drug charges. The suspicions William had harbored proved chillingly true. Frederick had indeed been using the family farmhouse to manufacture methamphetamine. During the drug investigation, authorities made a startling revelation. Frederick was also considered a suspect in the 1998 murder of a Philadelphia police officer. His body was never recovered. Police further stated that Frederick was also a suspect in the probable murder of his own brother, William. While no one has ever been charged directly in the death of the police officer or William Mueller, Frederick pleaded guilty to the drug offenses in 2001. At the time of his disappearance, William Mueller was newly divorced, but he had 3 daughters and other relatives living in the area who cared deeply for him. 7 years after he vanished, William was legally declared dead, and his estate, valued at $235,000, was disbursed to his relatives. The case of William Mueller remains officially unsolved. In the city of Philadelphia, the final days of the year 2000 brought with them a mystery that would defy easy answers, leaving a family shattered and a young child forever marked by a horrific, indelible memory. This is the story of Asa Muhammad, a devoted young mother who vanished without a trace, and her son, a silent witness whose innocent words would eventually speak of murder. Asa Muhammad, a spirited 20-year-old, was last seen on November 30th, 2000. Her last known location was her residence, a boarding house situated in the vicinity of the 1600 block of North 56th Street in Philadelphia. With her, on that fateful day, was her 2-year-old son, Amaru. Those who knew Asa described her as a competent, caring mother, someone wholly dedicated to her child. She was actively building a future for herself and Amaru, diligently employed at a local beauty salon while simultaneously pursuing her education at the Venus Beauty Academy. For anyone who knew Asa, The very notion that she would willingly abandon her precious son was, quite simply, unthinkable. As days stretched into agonizing weeks following their disappearance, the silence surrounding Asa and Amaru was deafening. There was no trace, no lead, just a terrifying void. Then, from the unexpected, a glimmer of hope pierced through the despair. Several weeks after they vanished, in a truly remarkable and bewildering turn of events, little Amaru was found. He was discovered abandoned, left on the doorstep of the Liberty Temple Church in Newark, New Jersey. The sight must have been heartbreaking, yet Amaru himself was a small miracle. He was neatly dressed and appeared to be in good health, a testament to someone's care, but he was utterly alone, unable to explain his circumstances. The 2-year-old, bewildered and disoriented by his ordeal, could only recall his first name. It took several painstaking days for authorities to positively identify him as the missing Amaru, Asa Muhammad's son. The discovery brought immense, overwhelming relief to his family, but it simultaneously deepened the chilling mystery surrounding his mother's fate. Where is Asa? Who had taken her son, and why was he left in a distant city? Once Amaru was safely reunited with his mother's relatives, the true, horrific nature of his experience began to unfold, albeit in the innocent, fragmented words of a 2-year-old. Amaru, as best he could, recounted a terrifying ordeal. He had witnessed his mother's murder. He told his stunned family that his mother had been involved in a violent altercation with another individual at their home. This person, he described, had brutally punched Asa and then, in a devastating act, struck her with a rock. And she died, he simply told them. Most chillingly, Amaru, in his innocence, even named his mother's killer, though that individual has never been publicly identified or charged. Asa's residence was a boarding house located on 56th Street near Hunter, a property managed by her father's half-brother, Charles Dawkins. Reports from the family indicated that Asa and Dawkins reportedly had a troubled relationship, characterized by frequent arguments. When Asa disappeared, it was Dawkins who informed her family that she had packed her belongings and left his home willingly. And indeed, upon inspection, her room at the boarding house was found to be completely cleaned out. The only items remaining were a solitary dresser and a bed with nothing but a bottom sheet. This unsettlingly pristine condition of the room stood in stark, chilling contrast to the child's horrific account of violence and death within those very walls. Despite the compelling, albeit heartbreaking, testimony of a child witness and the profoundly suspicious circumstances surrounding her disappearance and the discovery of her son, no suspect have ever been arrested in Asa Muhammad's case. Foul play is, understandably, strongly suspected. The clean, empty room, the conflicting narrative from her father's half-brother, and most significantly, the direct, unvarnished account from a 2-year-old boy detailing his mother's violent end and naming her assailant. These are the perplexing pieces of a puzzle that has remained tragically incomplete for over 2 decades. Asa Muhammad's case continues to be an unsolved cold case. The quiet evening of May 22, 1989, promised a routine into a workday for Dawn Mosino. She was last seen departing from Bryn Mawr Hospital in Bryn Mawr, Pennsylvania, where she was employed as a hostess in the nutrition department. Her plan was simple and familiar. Utilize public transportation to return to her residence in the 100 block of Eaton Drive in Wayne, Pennsylvania, after a shift. But Dawn never arrived home. She has not been heard from again since. As investigators began to piece together the events of that evening, a crucial detail emerged from one of Dawn's friends. This friend told authorities that shortly before her disappearance, Dawn was accompanied by Thomas W. Hawkins Jr. The witness was able to positively identify Hawkins from a photograph. The name Thomas W. Hawkins Jr. immediately sent a chilling ripple through the investigation. He was a man with a dark past, having already served 6 years in prison for the murder of a teenage girl in 1980. What made his presence even more ominous was the fact that after Dawn vanished, Hawkins was charged with the 1989 rape and homicide of his own niece. He was subsequently convicted of his niece's murder in Pennsylvania and sentenced to death in 1990. Despite his known history of violence and his connection to Dawn on the day she disappeared, Thomas W. Hawkins Jr. has never been charged in connection with Dawn Mosino's case. Authorities, desperate for answers, even offered to commute Hawkins's death sentence to life imprisonment in exchange for information about Dawn's whereabouts or fate. Yet, he consistently denied any involvement in her disappearance. Dawn's mother provided investigators with further insights into the connection between her daughter and Hawkins. She revealed that Hawkins had worked with Dawn in the mid-1980s at the Powley Rehabilitation Center. After Dawn secured her position as a hostess at Bryn Mawr Hospital's nutrition department, her mother stated that Hawkins expressed a desire to work at the facility as well. He had, on several occasions, asked Dawn to assist him with an interview at the hospital. Her mother also recalled that Hawkins had given Dawn several rides from the bus stop near the rehabilitation center in the past, suggesting a pre-existing, if perhaps casual, relationship built on convenience. Dawn Mosino was described as an independent yet reliable young woman. She was known for keeping a regular schedule, never missing work, and always returning home to her family at night. Although she lived with her mother and sister, she maintained her own phone number and bank account, demonstrating her capacity for self-sufficiency. In 1989, the year she disappeared, Dawn was also actively involved with the Special Olympics, where she had won several medals, highlighting her dedication and achievements. Her disappearance remains unsolved. Authorities in Radnor Township, Pennsylvania, continue to handle the ongoing investigation into Dawn Mosino's fate, but answers have eluded them for decades. The specter of Thomas W. Hawkins Jr. looms large over the case, an uncharged figure whose known violent history and last known contact with Dawn paint a disturbing picture of what may have occurred on May 22, 1989. Fawn Marie Mountain was known as a fun-loving woman by those closest to her, someone who delighted in making up dances to her favorite songs. Throughout her school years, she enthusiastically participated in many extracurricular activities, always extending herself to help a friend in need. Yet behind the radiant light Fawn shined on those around her lay a profound and deeply hidden darkness. During her childhood, Fawn endured unimaginable abuse. Despite these early traumas, she grew into a caring and warm young woman, cherishing moments spent with her favorite cousin, Bridget Gill, watching comedies or their beloved horror movies in their hometown of Altoona, Pennsylvania. Altoona, a city in Blair County with a population of over 43,000, was established as part of the thriving railroad industry and has since grown significantly, boasting its own baseball team, a symphony orchestra, and numerous landmarks and museums. Unfortunately, Fawn's journey led her into a relationship that mirrored the abuse of her past. She would have 2 children with this partner, suffering silently for some time before the man finally left her. This abandonment deeply crushed Fawn, as she still held affection for him despite the pain he inflicted. She began to feel unworthy of affection, overwhelmed, and unable to cope with the immense responsibility of raising 2 children on her own. In her despair, she tragically turned to alcohol and drugs, and subsequently found herself in relationships with other men who seemed to inflict just as much abuse as the father of her children. The tragic consequences of this downward spiral eventually led to her losing custody of both of her beloved children. Soon after this devastating loss, Fawn found herself pregnant again. Sadly, the little girl, who would be named Kaden, was stillborn. This loss was another crushing blow for Fawn. She had Kaden cremated and, in a poignant act of enduring maternal love, always kept Kaden's ashes close by her. In 2009, a glimmer of hope appeared, and things seemed to be turning around for Fawn. That year, she met a woman named Heather Dibbert at a local bar called The Island. The connection was immediate and powerful. This marked Fawn's first relationship with a woman, and it initially appeared to be precisely what she needed in her life. After dating for a few months, Fawn excitedly told her family that she and Heather were moving in together into a trailer at the Binks Mill Court in a nearby small town called Claysburg. Heather and her brother, Mike, both worked at their family's butcher shop in town. Mike would also be living next door to Heather and Fawn with his girlfriend, Stephanie Clark. However, a foreboding remark from Fawn to her mother, Dorothy, hinted at the shadows to come. "I'm afraid that if I move to Claysburg with Heather, I may never come back to Altoona." What could she have meant by such a chilling statement? In the beginning, as the new couple spent every waking moment together, Fawn's family didn't think anything of it. But as time wore on, they began to feel that Heather was monopolizing Fawn's time, consuming her completely. Fawn, from her perspective, believed Heather simply needed her close, her deep love demanding constant proximity. What Fawn didn't realize, or perhaps couldn't admit, was that Heather was slowly and systematically isolating her from everyone and everything familiar. Heather also had a disturbing history of domestic violence. Several previous partners had been forced to seek restraining orders against her. Stephanie, Heather's brother's girlfriend, even described Heather as short-tempered, rough, and cold. The extent of Fawn's isolation under Heather's control was extreme. When Heather left their home for work, she either took Fawn with her and locked her in the car for her entire shift, or she would padlock their front door, ensuring Fawn couldn't leave. Fawn was never allowed to have a job or friends of her own. A cell phone was forbidden, and any calls that came to their trailer were automatically forwarded directly to Heather's personal cell phone. The only lifeline Fawn had was talking to Stephanie, their next-door neighbor, through the cracks of the trailer's windows. This was a literal imprisonment. When Heather began to detect Fawn's growing unhappiness and yearning for freedom, she started sending her mother to drop in during the day to ensure Fawn was behaving. During one of these visits, Heather's mother caught Stephanie and Fawn talking through the windows. As a result, Heather, in a chilling act of control, boarded up all the windows. At this point, Fawn desperately wanted out of the relationship, but she had no means to escape. Each time she managed to break free, she invariably ran home to her mother's house. But Heather would inevitably show up, demanding that Fawn leave with her, and Fawn, tragically, always complied. Fawn's mother noticed that her daughter was increasingly trying to hide bruises by wearing long sleeves and high collars. But the injuries were still noticeable. The abuse became so severe that local hospitals also began to notice Fawn's recurring injuries and attempted to get her help. In response, Heather simply started taking Fawn to different hospitals to avoid suspicion. Time after time, Fawn went back to Heather because she was threatened with the unthinkable. If she didn't return, Caden's precious ashes would be thrown in the trash. Fawn couldn't bear the thought of losing the last tangible piece of her child and continued to give in to Heather's demands. There was another severe blow-up in February of 2011. This time, Fawn was left locked in Heather's car while Heather was at work. Fawn managed to get out of the car, triggering the car's alarm, and ran. She quickly found a phone and called a friend who agreed to take her back to the trailer so she could retrieve Caden's ashes. Unfortunately, once there, she realized she would have to break the lock to gain entry. Heather, alerted to the break-in, called the police and reported that someone was burglarizing her trailer. Fawn was caught, fined an exorbitant $2,700, and charged with felony burglary and trespassing. Devastatingly, she returned to Heather shortly after that incident. Fawn then broke off all contact with her family. To her mother's shock and profound heartbreak, Dorothy received a restraining order that had been filed by Fawn herself. The isolation was now complete. It was just Fawn and Heather. But 25-year-old Fawn made one more desperate attempt to escape her unbearable situation in October of 2012. This time, she ran to her mother's house. However, with that restraining order in place, her mother Dorothy wound up receiving jail time for violating it, and Fawn, once again, went back to Heather. That was the last time that Dorothy ever saw her daughter. Dorothy worried constantly about her daughter's safety and repeatedly asked the police to perform welfare checks. Every single time, she was assured that Fawn was fine. The last official welfare check was performed in November of 2012. Dates vary slightly, but it is widely believed that a few days after Thanksgiving in late 2012, Heather and Fawn traveled to the family butcher shop to help clean and sterilize. Mike and Stephanie, Heather's brother and his girlfriend, helped with this as well. When the strenuous cleaning was done, beers were handed out and Fawn drank, which was unusual for her, as she typically avoided alcohol. This seemed to upset Heather. As the two prepared to leave, Fawn mentioned to Stephanie that she simply wanted to spend a relaxing evening at home, watching one of her favorite horror movies. The very next morning, Stephanie saw Heather outside of the trailer, talking to her parents while smoking a cigarette. When Stephanie asked where Fawn was, Heather calmly stated that she had woken up at 3 a.m. to use the bathroom, noticed that Fawn was gone, and hadn't seen her since. Fawn's personal items, including all of her clothes and, crucially, Caden's ashes, were still in the trailer. Fawn had supposedly left in the middle of a cold winter night, without even a coat. Stephanie recalls hearing Mike jokingly, but chillingly, say behind her, "I bet she killed her." Stephanie knew immediately that something was terribly wrong when Heather made no attempt to find Fawn or contact anyone about her being missing. Stephanie herself contacted Fawn's mother, Dorothy, and conveyed her grave concerns. Dorothy then called the police, but she was told that no investigation would take place because Fawn was an adult and, according to law enforcement, could simply disappear if she wanted to. As a result, no missing persons report was officially taken. A week later, in the bitter cold of the Pennsylvania winter, Heather and her father undertook a renovation of the trailer, conspicuously replacing all the carpets and floorboards. They also installed a dog run in the backyard, which involved pouring concrete over a portion of it. However, once the concrete was poured, no further work was done to actually complete the dog run. Soon after, Heather moved to Ohio. She returned a couple of months later with a new girlfriend, whom she eventually married 6 months later. Around this time, the Dibbert family decided to close their local butcher shop, selling off all of their tools and equipment. No one ever found out exactly why they sold the shop. Anytime Heather was questioned about Fawn's whereabouts, her answers seemed to shift and change, sometimes claiming Fawn was in prison, other times alleging she was a sex worker living in another state. In April of 2015, a family member of Fawn's contacted Heather, trying to locate Fawn. This family member was shocked to learn that Fawn had supposedly taken off 3 years prior, having had no idea that Fawn had been missing for that entire time. Adding to the mystery, Fawn had actually still been supposedly receiving Social Security checks. She had been receiving them before she went missing, and it appeared that, upon investigation, she was still receiving them afterward, with the checks being sent to Heather's same address at the trailer park. Fawn's family complained vehemently, and a letter was sent out stating that if Fawn didn't make an appearance in person at the offices to verify her information, the checks would stop. She never appeared. Her family then spoke to the police again, insisting that something concrete be done, and this is when Fawn's missing persons report was finally officially entered into the system, a staggering 3 years after she first went missing. Years later, of course, there were fewer witnesses and memories were inevitably fading. Officers questioned everyone they could and took statements, but with little to no tangible evidence to work with, Fawn's case went cold very quickly. At the start of 2017, Bridget Gill, Fawn's cousin, finally found out that Fawn was missing. The two had grown apart over the years, with family lives and personal tragedies driving them even further apart. To make matters worse, when Bridget contacted the police to check on their investigation, she was told that the original file had gone missing. The investigator who had been handling her case had been fired for unrelated reasons, and the case was simply not reassigned to anyone else. The Pennsylvania State Police eventually became involved in August of 2017. Fawn's family now had access to proper missing persons posters, shirts, stickers, and bracelets. They were even able to put up billboards with her information along the highway, and they publicly announced a $10,000 reward for information. Bridget, along with Fawn's family, friends, and supporters, now rallied together in her name, proudly calling themselves Fawn's Army. Heather was eventually evicted from the trailer court due to her behavior. After she left, the property including the infamous dog run and the trailer itself, were thoroughly searched, but no evidence of Fawn was found. A Bring Fawn Marie Home Facebook page was started, and the family diligently worked to keep raising awareness with the media. True crime YouTuber Kendall Ray stepped up for the family in a significant way in 2021. She not only covered the complex case, but also helped to raise thousands of dollars for the family's GoFundMe. This crucial financial support allowed them to continue raising exposure, maintain those vital billboards that were already up, and ensure they kept running. It also enabled them to increase the reward for information on Fawn, which is now a substantial $20,000. Just recently, the family held a car cruise fundraiser at a local community park to raise even more for Fawn's fund and to help sustain their ongoing search efforts. The GoFundMe is still active for those wishing to contribute. As her cousin Bridget points out, she has an army now. It's not just us fighting alone. That's been one of the most amazing things in this journey, is to know that we're not alone now. We're not screaming to the world, and nobody's listening to us. People are listening now. State Trooper Jacob Riemann recently made a public statement confirming that the case is indeed active, saying, "We've identified a person of interest in this case." The books are never closed on this. Fawn is now considered to be an endangered missing person. She stands at 5 feet 2 inches tall and weighs around 105 pounds. Her eyes are blue, and her hair is brown. She has piercings in her ears and lip. Notably, she has a large tattoo on her back of an angel with wings and the words R.I.P. Caden. She also has a tattoo of the name Braden on her neck. It is believed she may dye her hair black or auburn, and she could possibly be going by the nickname Bambi. If you have any information on the disappearance of Fawn Mountain, please call the Pennsylvania State Police at 814-696-6100, referring to case number PA 17-5. The family and their growing Fawn's army continue to keep their eyes, ears, and hearts open, tirelessly looking for Fawn Mountain, holding on a hope that one day she will come home.